You delivered garbage. What Bracken didn't know I held, revealed before the trade show. The ballroom went dead quiet the second Bracken took my name in his mouth and spat it on the floor. He had the microphone, gold light off the chandeliers, the smell of seared filet and warm champagne, 400 people at round tables in the Aria's grand ballroom, and Bracken up on the award stage in a $4,000 suit saying my company delivered garbage. Cho Design promised us the moon, he said, and laughed his easy radio host laugh into the room. What they delivered was garbage. We rebuilt the whole thing in-house. That's the product you see tonight. He gestured at the screen behind him, at the sleek gray housing of the Meridian sensor, and the room applauded, and somewhere near the back, a woman I'd trained said my name like a question. I sat at table 19 with my hands folded on the white cloth and did not move. I could feel Fen beside me go rigid, could feel him about to stand, and I put 2 fingers on his wrist. Not yet. Bracken had just told a ballroom full of my industry that I was a fraud who couldn't ship. He had stiffed a $200,000 invoice and then stood up to take a bow for the thing I built. He had no idea what was inside my bag. Here is what a man like Bracken never learns until it is far too late. The person you humiliate in public is sometimes the only person in the building who knows where the bodies are buried, because she buried them on purpose with a receipt. He thought he'd bought me. He thought silence came with the check he never wrote. He was about to find out what I actually was. Let me go back, because the shape of a thing only makes sense from the start. I grew up in Hayward, California, in a stucco house off Tennyson Road where the porch light flickered every time the fridge kicked on, and nobody ever fixed either one. My father, Daniel Cho, was a tool and die man at a shop in San Leandro for 31 years. He came home smelling of cutting oil and metal, and after dinner he'd sit at the kitchen table with a mechanical pencil and a machinist's steel square his own foreman had given him in 1974, a Starrett, the blade blued dark with age, the stock worn to a soft shine by decades of his thumb. He'd let me hold it up against the light to check a corner while he did the real math in his head. The machine doesn't care how you feel about the number, Adeline, he told me. It only cares if the number is true. He died when I was 26. The steel square was the one thing I asked for. I was not a natural at anything except stubbornness. I put myself through Cal State East Bay, then took an $18 an hour drafting job at a medical device shop in Fremont, and I stayed late for 6 years, learning the parts of the business nobody wanted to explain. How a sensor housing gets tooled. How firmware and hardware argue with each other. How a $12 part fails in the field and costs a company $2 million in recalls. By 2014, I understood something most engineers there did not. The money and the danger both lived in the handoff. In the moment one company gives its design to another and pretends the paperwork will sort itself out. So in 2016, I started Cho Design out of a 900 square foot unit in an industrial park in Hayward, with $40,000 in savings and my father's steel square on the desk where a nameplate should go. I did contract product development, sensors, housings, embedded firmware, for companies too small to keep the talent in-house and too proud to admit it. My rule was simple, and it made some clients hate me. I owned my source until I was paid in full. Every contract I ever signed carried an IP retention clause. In plain terms, the master files, the schematics, the firmware source, the tooling geometry, the thing you actually need, the product, stayed legally mine until the last dollar cleared. Clients got working prototypes and demo units. They did not get the keys. Most people signed and forgot it. It was 6 lines on page 9. It was the most important thing I ever did. I met Bracken Aldis in the spring of 2021. He ran a company called Aperture Systems out of Scottsdale, Arizona, industrial environmental sensors, the boxes that tell a data center its air is about to cook $40 million of servers. He was 52, silver at the temples, a former college quarterback who still moved like the room belonged to him. He found me through a referral and flew into Oakland to take me and Fen to dinner at a steakhouse in Jack London Square, and for 2 hours, he was the most charming client I'd ever had. Fen Okafor was my engineering partner. Not an employee, a partner. 30% of the firm and 100% of the parts I was weak on. We'd met at the Fremont shop. He was the calmest man I have ever known. He could find a grounding fault at 2 a.m. and hum while he did it. That first dinner, Bracken leaned across the table and said, "You two are exactly what Aperture's been missing. I don't want vendors, I want partners." He said partners the way some men say, "I love you," on a second date. Fen kicked my ankle under the table. I ignored it. I wanted to believe him. We had 11 employees by then and a lease renewal coming, and Bracken was dangling a flagship product. The product was the Meridian Sensor, a next-generation environmental unit for data centers, smaller and 40% more accurate than anything Aperture had. We signed in June 2021. The contract was $680,000 across 18 months, milestone-based, and buried on page 9 in the boilerplate his own lawyer waved through was my IP retention clause, Section 9.3. Cho Design retains all right, title, and interest in the deliverable source until receipt of final payment in full. Bracken signed on a Tuesday, clapped Fen on the shoulder and said, "To the moon, kids." He'd remember that phrase. So would I. The first year was genuinely good. That's the part that still catches in my throat. We were good together. Fen and I built something beautiful, a sensor that ran cooler, calibrated faster, and fit a housing so clean that Bracken's own sales guys started sending us thank you notes. We hit the first 3 milestones early. Aperture paid on time, and Bracken flew us out to Scottsdale twice and put us up at a resort with a pool shaped like a comma. And once, drunk on the patio, he told me his father had run a hardware store into bankruptcy and died broke, and that he'd sworn he'd never be the kind of man people could push around. I thought I understood him. I filed it away. I file everything. The first wrong note came in March 2022. We were 3 days from a design review when Aperture's new VP of Operations, a man named Trask Whitfield, asked, casually on a call, camera off, whether we could share the firmware repository directly, just to streamline collaboration. Not a demo build, the repository, the source. I said what I always said, happy to, at final payment, per 9.3. There was a pause on the line, the small mechanical click of a mute button, and then Trask said, Sure, no worries. Fen wrote me afterward. They weren't asking to collaborate, they were asking for the keys. I told him I'd noticed. That night, I took my father's steel square off the desk and set it against the edge of a drawing, just to feel a corner come up true, just to feel something be true. The second note was the payments. Milestone 4 was due April 30th, 2022, $120,000. It came May 19th. Milestone 5, due June 30th, came July 24th, and only after 2 emails. Each time there was a warm phone call from Bracken himself, a story about a wire transfer stuck in Treasury, a laugh, you know I'm good for it, Adeline. And each time the money did come, so I told myself I was being paranoid. But I noticed the pattern, and I did the thing my father taught me. I stopped feeling about the numbers and started recording them. I built a spreadsheet. Invoice date, due date, paid date, days late. By milestone 5, the average was 31 days late and climbing. The machine doesn't care how you feel. It only cares if the number is true. The third note was Trask again, in August, at a barbecue Bracken threw at his house in Paradise Valley. Flagstone patio, a misting system hissing over the guests, a caterer in a white coat. Trask cornered me by the drinks table and asked how portable my firmware really was, whether another engineering team could pick it up cold. He smiled the whole time. Behind him, I saw a young woman in a navy blazer watching us. Priya Vance, Aperture's staff engineer, 28, the one person over there who actually understood what Fen and I had built. She caught my eye and gave a small, tight shake of her head. A warning. I didn't know yet what she was warning me about. I just knew that a good engineer had looked at her own boss's plan and been ashamed of it. I flew home to Hayward the next morning, and my car wouldn't turn over on the first try in the long-term lot, and I sat there in the heat, cranking a dead-sounding engine, and I thought, they are going to try to take it and not pay. I didn't have proof. I had a spreadsheet, a mute button click, and a young engineer's tight little headshake, but I trusted my instrument. I always have. So I did 3 quiet things, and I told no one but Fen. First, I made sure our IP retention clause was airtight. I sent the whole contract to Colm Rafferty, an attorney in Oakland I'd used for lease work. 60-ish, rumpled, a former union lawyer who talked slow and thought fast. He read Section 9.3 twice and looked at me over his glasses. Adeline, this is the cleanest retention clause I've read in years. Who drafted it? I told him I did in 2016, after watching a client walk off with a shop's whole product line. Colm smiled. They signed this? Their lawyer let them sign this? I said their lawyer waved it through as boilerplate. Colm took his glasses off. Then whatever they're planning, he said, they're planning it standing on a trap door. Second, I made sure the master source never left my building. Aperture had demo units, calibration builds, compiled binaries, everything they needed to show a product, and nothing they needed to reproduce it. The real files lived on an air-gapped drive in a safe in Hayward, mirrored to an encrypted archive with a timestamp on every commit. Fen's idea. Fen thought about failure the way other people think about breathing. Third, I kept delivering. That's the part people miss. I did not slow down. I did not sandbag. I did not give them a single honest reason to say I'd failed. We hit milestone 6 early. The Meridian sensor was, by October 2022, the best environmental unit in its class, and it was ours, and it was flawless, and every clean deliverable I handed over was another brick in a wall Bracken couldn't see me building. Then came the boiling point, the final milestone. Milestone 7, the production-ready release, was due December 15, 2022, worth $200,000, the last and biggest payment. On December 1st, I delivered it. The production firmware, the final tooling package, full documentation, a flawless pre-production run of 40 units that passed every test Aperture's own QA could throw at them. Priya Vance signed the acceptance report herself. I have it. It says, in her handwriting, meets or exceeds all specifications. The invoice went out December 2nd, net 30, due January 1st, 2023. It was not paid on January 1st. It was not paid on January 15th. On January 18th, I got an email, not from Bracken, from a lawyer at a firm in Phoenix, informing me that Aperture Systems was disputing the deliverable quality and would be withholding final payment pending review. No specifics, no failed test, just the word quality, doing all the work a lie does. I called Bracken. He took it, which surprised me, and for 90 seconds he was warm, and then he wasn't. Adeline, look, he said, and I could hear a TV somewhere behind him, some game, the crowd noise rising and falling. The board's not happy with what you shipped. Legal's involved now. I'd take a settlement number if you've got one. 40 cents on the dollar, we call it clean. Everybody moves on. 40 cents. $80,000 on a $200,000 invoice for work his own engineer had certified as flawless. I said, the deliverable passed acceptance testing. Priya signed it. There was a pause, and the crowd noise on his TV swelled, and Bracken said the thing I will hear for the rest of my life. Priya works for me. You don't. Then, softer, almost kind, the way you'd talk to a child who's failed to understand something obvious. "You delivered garbage, Adeline. Everybody's going to know it if you push this. I'll make sure they know it. Take the 80 and go build something in your little garage." He hung up. My little garage, the porch light of my whole life flickering in that one phrase. I want to tell you I cried. I didn't. Something in me went quiet and level instead, the way the room goes quiet right before a machine seats a part, exactly true. I walked to my desk in the Hayward unit. Everyone gone home, the space heater ticking, one fluorescent tube buzzing in the back, and I picked up my father's steel square. I laid it along the edge of the desk. I worked out on paper beside it, just for the pleasure of a true number, exactly how much Bracken had shorted me across 2 years of late payments and the final theft. The blued blade sat flush and true against the wood. The machine doesn't care how you feel. Then I called Colum. He answered on the 4th ring, chewing something. I told him the whole thing in 4 sentences. The $200,000 withheld, the quality fiction, the 40-cent settlement, Priya's signed acceptance, and the word garbage. Colum stopped chewing. "Adeline," he said, "do they have your source?" "No," I said. "They have demos and binaries." The master files never left my safe, and Section 9.3 says the work is legally mine until they pay in full, which they have not. Colum was quiet for a moment. Then he laughed, one short, dry bark. "So let me make sure I understand. They didn't pay you, they're about to badmouth you across your own industry, and the product they're planning to sell is theirs, they don't legally own a single line of." I said that was correct. "Then we don't beg for $80,000, Colum said. "We file for arbitration under your own contract. We demand the full $200, and we ask for an injunction on anything they build off your design. When's their big splash?" I already knew. The whole industry did. Aperture had reserved the center stage slot at the Data Infrastructure Expo Awards Night in Las Vegas, the biggest trade show of the year, in April, to unveil the Meridian sensor as their flagship, and, everyone assumed, to win the Product Innovation Award. Bracken had been telling people for months. He wanted the trophy. He wanted the room. Before the trade show, Colum said, "We make this land before he ever gets on that stage. Nothing focuses a man like a deadline he chose himself." That was the click, not tears, a decision. Here is what people never believe about a real reckoning. It is boring. It is documents. It is dates and hashes and signatures and chains of custody, assembled by tired people under lamplight, while the person you're building it against sleeps easy, certain he's already won. We had 90 days. Colum filed the arbitration demand on January 30th, 2023, under the Dispute Resolution Clause in Bracken's own contract, binding arbitration through the American Arbitration Association, seated in Phoenix, which was exactly what Aperture had wanted when they drafted it, because they'd imagined it as a place to bury small vendors quietly. We turned it into the room where I'd take everything back. The claim? $200,000 unpaid, plus a demand for injunctive relief barring Aperture from manufacturing, marketing, or selling any product derived from Cho Design's retained source under Section 9.3. Fenn built the evidence spine. He was extraordinary. He pulled the time-stamped commit history from our air-gapped archive, every line of the Meridian firmware, cryptographically stamped, showing authorship down to the hour, going back to July 2021. He assembled the full delivery record, 40 pre-production units, every test log, every acceptance form. And he laid our master source beside the binaries Aperture had in hand and showed the simple, damning truth that you cannot rebuild what they were claiming to have rebuilt without the files sitting in my safe. They had a locked box. We had the only key and a notarized record proving we'd never handed it over. Column took Priya Vance's signed acceptance report, meets or exceeds all specifications, dated December 1st, her handwriting, and set it in a binder tab all its own. This, he said, tapping it, is the whole case in one page. Their own engineer certified the work they're calling garbage. A man can lie to a ballroom. It's harder to lie to his own signature. And then, Priya did the thing I will be grateful for until I die. She called me. On a Sunday in February, from a number I didn't know, her voice low like someone might be listening. She'd left Aperture, quit in January, 3 days after the quality dispute email went out, because Trask Whitfield had asked her to write a memo documenting deficiencies in our deliverable, and she had refused to sign her name to a lie. There were no deficiencies, she said. It passed. I ran the tests myself. I have my own copies of the logs. She was afraid. She was 28 and job hunting, and Bracken was the kind of man who made phone calls about people. But she'd watched him take my work and my name in the same breath, and she couldn't carry it. You built something clean, she told me. I'm not going to help him call it garbage. I told her she didn't have to be brave. She said, quiet, I already decided to be. Column took her statement under oath in March. She never wavered. Meanwhile, Bracken did exactly what men like Bracken do when they think they've won. He got louder. He told a trade podcast in February that Aperture had brought development in-house after a disappointing vendor experience. He told a reporter from an industry newsletter that the Meridian was 100% Aperture engineered. He was building his own gallows and nailing each board in place on the record, and every quote his PR team pushed out, Fenn screenshotted and Column filed. Bracken thought he was writing a comeback story. He was writing our exhibit list. The arbitration hearing was set for April 3rd, 4 days before the Las Vegas Awards night. Bracken's lawyers pushed hard to delay it past the show. The arbitrator, a retired federal magistrate named Eleanor Saris, denied the continuance in a 2-line order. She'd read the contract. She'd read Section 9.3. I think she understood, the way Column had, what she was looking at. I did not sleep much that spring. I'd sit at my desk in Hayward past midnight with the space heater ticking and one bad fluorescent tube buzzing, and I'd take my father's steel square out of its case and check corners I didn't need to check, the edge of a drawing, the joint of the desk, the square of a shelf. I wasn't measuring. I was steadying my hands. The blade was nicked in 2 places by then and worn dull at one end, but a corner it called true was true, and that was the point. My father was a man nobody in that steakhouse world would have looked at twice. He built things that had to be exactly right, or people got hurt. He never once got pushed around by a number that wasn't true, and neither, it turned out, would I. The arbitration ran 2 days, April 3rd and 4th, in a beige conference room at a hearing center in Phoenix. No jury, no gallery, just Eleanor Saris at the head of a table, Column and me on one side, and on the other, Bracken, 2 lawyers, and Trask Whitfield in a suit that fit him worse than his confidence did. Bracken testified first, and he was good at the start. Warm, wounded, reasonable. The vendor overpromised. The board lost faith. Regrettable. He actually used the word regrettable about me. Then Column stood up, unhurried, rumpled, and laid the first document on the table, Priya's acceptance report. Ms. Vance was Aperture's staff engineer on this project? Yes. She signed this on December 1st, certifying the deliverable met or exceeded all specifications. Bracken said he wasn't familiar with every form. Colm laid down the second document, the February podcast transcript, brought development in-house. Then Bracken's own quote, 100% Aperture engineered. Then Fenn's time-stamped commit log, the whole authorship history of a product Bracken had just sworn under oath his team built, every hour of it stamped to my company, going back 9 months before Aperture had written a single line. "Mr. Bracken," Calm said, gentle as a man helping an elder across a street, "can you produce the master source your team used to, in your words, rebuild this product in-house?" Silence. A long one. Trask Whitfield studied the table. Bracken's lawyer asked for a recess. Eleanor Saris said, dry as chalk, "He can answer the question first." Bracken couldn't produce it. There was nothing to produce. You can't rebuild what you never had the files for, and the files were in a safe in Hayward, and the contract he'd signed said in 6 clean lines that until he paid me in full, the whole thing, every schematic, every line of firmware, the tooling geometry, the product itself, was legally, entirely mine. Section 9.3. His own lawyer had waved it through as boilerplate in 2021. I watched the color leave his face in real time. It's not a figure of speech. It goes gray from the jaw up, like a tide going out. Eleanor Saris issued her ruling on the morning of April 6th, one day before Las Vegas. She found for Cho Design on every count. Aperture was ordered to pay the full $200,000, plus interest, plus my legal fees, a total of $271,400. And she granted the injunction. Aperture Systems was barred, effective immediately, from manufacturing, marketing, displaying, or selling the Meridian sensor or any product derived from Cho Design's retained source, pending full payment and a negotiated license that, her order noted pointedly, Cho Design was under no obligation to grant. One day before the biggest unveiling of Bracken's career, a retired federal magistrate legally forbade him from putting the product on the stage. I flew to Las Vegas anyway. So did Fenn. So did Column. I want to be honest about why. Not to gloat, or not only. Aperture still had the center stage award slot, and Bracken, I was certain, would try to talk his way around a court order in front of 400 people. Because talking his way around things was the only skill he'd ever truly had. I wanted to be in the room when he couldn't. Which brings us back to the ballroom at the Aria. The gold light, the seared fillet. Bracken at the microphone in his $4,000 suit, gesturing at the gray housing of the Meridian on the screen behind him, telling 400 people that Cho Design delivered garbage and Aperture rebuilt it in-house. He should not have said the product's name out loud, because the second he did, the second he displayed it, on a screen at a commercial event to sell it, he violated Eleanor Saris's injunction in front of the entire industry. And I had the signed order in the bag at my feet. I did not stand up and scream. My father didn't raise a screamer. I let him finish. I let him have his applause. And when the MC stepped back to the podium to announce that the Product Innovation Award went, in fact, to a different company entirely, Aperture didn't win. They were never going to win. The judges had gotten wind of the injunction that afternoon. I watched Bracken's smile curdle at the edges. Then, in the small, confused lull afterward, Column rose from table 19 in his rumpled suit, walked to the show's director at the side of the stage, and handed her a single folded document. I watched her read it. I watched her go still. I watched her lean to the AV tech and say something, and the screen behind Bracken, the gray Meridian housing, my housing, went black. Bracken said into the mic, "We seem to be having a technical," and then the show's counsel reached him, murmured in his ear, and put the injunction into his hands. The room was quiet enough to hear the ice settle in 400 glasses. I watched him read the words he'd been too arrogant to believe were real. Barred from displaying or marketing. Full payment ordered. IP retained by Cho Design. His own signature at the bottom of the contract it enforced. He looked up from the page and out into the room, and his eyes found me at table 19. I was not smiling. I want to tell you I gave him something to remember. A nod, a look. But the truth is, I just held his gaze, the way you hold a steel square up to the light and let the true edge speak for itself. He set the microphone down on the podium with both hands, very carefully, like a man setting down something that had gotten too heavy, and he walked off the stage, and the applause that had been his 10 minutes ago did not come back. Trask Whitfield left before dessert. Priya Vance, who I'd flown out and seated at table 19 beside Fenn, watched the screen go dark and put her hand over her mouth, and when she looked at me, her eyes were wet. "You built something clean," she whispered, the same words as before. This time, I got to answer her properly. "We did," I said, "all of us." The rest was paperwork, which is where these things always end. Aperture paid the $271,400 within the month. Colm made sure of it. Without a legal product and without a license, I refused to sell them cheap. The Meridian never shipped under Aperture's name. Bracken lost his flagship, then his biggest investor, then, by that autumn, his CEO title. The board that had been unhappy with what I shipped turned out to be much unhappier with a chief executive who'd exposed them to a willful infringement finding in front of the whole industry. Last I heard, Aperture had been folded into a competitor for parts. Bracken sells enterprise software now, in Denver, to people who have never heard the word Meridian. His little garage, you might say. And me? 6 weeks after Vegas, I signed a lease on a new building, 6,200 square feet in an industrial park in Fremont, room for the 22 people Cho Design employs now, with a glass-walled office in the corner that has actual light. The Meridian sensor ships today under my company's name. 3 data center operators who watched that awards night reached out within a month, and one of them, a woman who'd been in the ballroom, told me she'd bought from us specifically because she'd watched a man try to steal our work in public and fail. The insult made the sale. Garbage, it turned out, was the best marketing Bracken ever did for me, and he did it for free. We had a dinner, the 4 of us who'd carried it, Fenn, Colm, Priya, and me, at the same steakhouse in Jack London Square where Bracken had once promised me the moon. I hired Priya that spring. She runs firmware validation now and signs her name only to things that are true. Fenn made a toast. He lifted his glass and said, "To garbage," and we all laughed until Colm had to set his water down, and I felt my father in the room, the smell of cutting oil, the flicker of a porch light that never got fixed, the man who taught me that the machine doesn't care how you feel, it only cares if the number is true. That night, I unpacked the last box in my new corner office in Fremont. The desk was bare where a nameplate should go. I took my father's steel square out of its case one more time and set it against the true edge of the desk, and on the paper beside it, I ran a slow number. The compound total of everything, principal and interest and the price of my own name, and it came out exactly true. Then I stood the square up, opened the top drawer of my own desk in my own building with my own name on the door, and laid it inside, and closed the drawer.